Okay, now we'll move on to this. Death or life are in the power of the tongue. At Proverbs 18, the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. He who finds a wife finds what's good and receives favor from the Lord. I thought I'd put those two things together there. It can be good or bad. If you find a wife, it's a good thing. But if we treat each other badly, then it's a bad thing. It's called intimate enemies. It's bad enough to have a stranger pick on you and be mean, but it's a lot worse when the person you love is doing that. It has so much more power. Life is what Scripture calls fruit of the Spirit. And in my doctoral dissertation, I compared the fruit of the Spirit with all the psychological research of what builds up what is life. And isn't it interesting is it's essentially what Scripture calls fruit of the Spirit. It's what psychology calls life, counseling, caring. Back in those days, they called it the core conditions of a helping relationship. My first books, and the book on Listening for Heaven's Sake has that. And you can learn those skills. Death, or what we call the Four Horsemen. Now, there's more research on this, and this is coming from John Gottman. If you really want to get into this in depth, get Gottman's books. I was teaching the Muslims down in Singapore, and I recommended Gottman's books, and the woman down there said, "He's Jewish. We can't read his book." Really interesting. So she said, "Why don't we write our own book together?" So I'm not sure. But anyway, I had a tremendous opportunity in Singapore to work with Muslims because they're desperately in need of the same thing, the fruit of the Spirit. I quoted the Scripture all the time. I just didn't quote where it came from. I'd say we have a proverb, and I'd quote. So it was really, really great. And I was nominated as the Teacher of the Year for the Muslims in Singapore, which is something I'm very proud. So you take the love and care, it'll transfer into any culture. It works. This stuff works. Now, you got this downward spiral. And I gave you that cycle of conflict intensity of the 7 stages. And that's something I give out in a lot of my counseling cases, and I've given it to you. You have all of that. But what they found is that the bottom 4, the 4 of these things, what Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, comes right out of the Revelation. This is deathly. So we want to help you learn to replace these 4. When you see these 4 things happening in the couples you're working with, or the families you're working with, that you replace them with love, joy, peace, gentleness, meekness, kindness. Okay, you help people learn that, how to do it. And we've got training and skills of actually how to change the habits. Because a lot of times people have got it down here, but they're not getting it up here. They know what to do is right, but they don't know how to do it. So we've taken that and turned it into skill building. Here are the 4. Criticism. That's a vague blame. And that's what Jesus called in Matthew 5, racha. If you say, call someone racha, that's criticism. Secondly, be contempt. That's a specific shaming of a person. This is the second horseman, and it would be what Jesus called in Matthew, you fool. And Jesus said, when you call a person fool, you're in danger of hell. You put the person in hell. Third, the third horseman, defensiveness. After a while, the fight-flight syndrome comes up and you become defensive and overwhelmed. Bitterness, that you're going deeper and deeper. The fourth one is become a stone wall. It's so painful to live, you become like a stone wall. Let's go over the first one, criticism. It goes from contented to complaint to criticism. It doesn't take us very long, if you love somebody and you live with them, to find out that you don't like everything about them. And it's hard to stay contented and not frustrated or angry. And when we get frustrated and angry, we want to change somebody. Now, that's a good thing. Nothing in this world was changed by people who were contented. Maybe contented cows produce good milk, but discontented people who do change, make things happen. But we need to learn how to do that in a way which is not attacking. we attend and still are able to be have a complaint. And we have skills on that using I statements. Now, once the complaint fails, when you don't get what you want, you don't change that other person, they're not changing their habits, or they're not changing fast enough, or they're relapsing, they fall back into an old habit, they're not picking up their socks, or whatever it is, it could be anything. And it's relapse, it's that changing that habit from this to this, and that's so hard to make that move. You have this tendency to go from, well, my complaints are not working, I'm going to do something a little stronger. And so they tend to raise the intensity of it and go to attack. That usually means that you attack a person's personality or character, not just a behavior. It's not just saying, this behavior is bugging me and bothering me, and this is not helpful. It's there's something wrong with you. For example, you always think about yourself. That's attacking the person, not just the behavior. And a lot of times, you'll find that when the language gets full of these always never stuff, it's moved into complaint. You never take me anyplace. Now, when that happens, when criticism automatically causes a person who's receiving that critical comment, a critical spirit, to have a fight-flight syndrome. God created us to either run away from problems and be safe, or fight. And there's an automatic way that our body reacts. Our blood pressure goes up, our brain waves go up, our eyes open, we get tense in our muscles, and we're ready to fight or flight. Now, that's okay if you have an occasional threat from external. But if you're living with an intimate enemy, that is what leads to a lot of stress and disease in our lives. Now, the second horseman is contempt. That's that fool. Contempt is putting another person down, saying you're better than they are. And behind that is not just that one action, it's a mindset. Now, the difference between anger, for example, and bitterness is great. Anger is a feeling that comes out. You know, Scripture says, be angry, but don't sin, and don't let the sun go down on your bitterness. It's a very different word. Bitterness is a mindset of disgust toward another person. And that is what Jesus said was the most dangerous. Says, I'm better, smarter, more spiritual. These insults really lead on an ongoing basis, if they hang around very long in a family, to what we call verbal abuse or even physical abuse and trauma. And it's very interesting that one of the people, when I'm working with people who have this kind of habit pattern, you have to teach them to change their thinking. So I've got that book out there. I wrote a book on this called Rational Christian Thinking, and I'm rewriting all my material on that to teach people how to develop new habits of thinking. Because when there's a criticism or a contemptuous interaction in the morning, and I leave for work, and that keeps playing over and over and over in my mind all day, I'm building up pain and toxicity. I'm building up poison within myself. And until I am able to relieve that, forgive, and go back, why, it's really going to be a tough thing. But it's very hard if I'm going back into that situation. I go back into the home, and I get more criticism and more contempt. Because even if you forgive, and even if you separate, and you get calmed down, you renew your mind, and you come back, and the same thing happens again, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate jumps up, and you're back in the same situation, same state that you were before you left. So we have to teach people how to renew their minds. I got a crisis call yesterday, 2 of them, from a couple, a pastor and wife, and they're in real crisis. And called me up, and I had to kind of talk them through some stuff. They're in another state, completely another state, mentally and emotionally as well as physically. But they have not taken any of this training, so they don't have the skills to change themselves. They don't know how to do it. So what we're doing in the churches is we're teaching those skills and getting rid of that stinking thinking. Common signs of contempt are insults, name-calling, hostile humor, putting people down, and non-verbally. Now, I'll never forget back when I was at University of Cincinnati and we had house churches there. and a whole group of us, and we're meeting. And I went to lunch with this young African-American woman, and she said, "Did you see what they did to me?" There were a group of guys, and they gave her the finger. They put her down. And didn't say a word, but she was destroyed. That was contempt from her colleagues. And very often we see a lot of contemptuous things said about people. For example, I have no brief for Paris Hilton, but the way people are talking about that person is very contemptuous. I think in America, people ought to be treated the same way by the law, whether you're a billionaire or in poverty. But we're not. I think people are saying the meanest, nastiest things. I don't know this person at all, whatsoever. But when you see that over this veneer of care in our culture, by both sides, right and left, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of rage that comes out against anybody who doesn't fit people's sense of what they want.